This week on Ebert and Roeper,
Did I tell you we're going to have it all?
You've never said that.
Steve Martin and Bonnie Hunt in Cheaper by the Dozen.
You went to another dimension. Nev Campbell and Robert Altman's The Company.
When you meet the love of your life, time stops.
And Ewan McGregor in Tim Burton's Big Fish. It's okay if you're not convinced. I think that's all right.
I may not have much, but I have more determination than any man you're ever likely to meet.
Sandra Templeton, I love you and I will marry you.
Ewan McGregor and Albert Finney play the same legendary character, young and old, in Big Fish. And we'll have an early review of Nev Campbell and The Company, plus we'll take another look at the final installment of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I'm Roger Ebert.
And I'm Richard Roeper. First up is Cheaper by the Dozen. It opens Christmas Day. We've got the early review. Now, after the disastrous remake of The Out-of-Towners with Steve Martin and Goldie Hawn, I was hardly jonesing for Steve Martin in another remake of a seemingly outdated concept, but that's why we go to the movies and we watch them all the way through. This is a breezy romp, a frequently funny and thoroughly inspired effort about one gigantic nuclear family.
I cleaned your clarinet. Please don't play it with food in your mouth again. Kim and Jessica, your teacher called and has made a request that you do not correct her in front of the class. Mike, you have show and tell today, and please, honey, remember that body parts do not count.
That's the scene stealing Bonnie Hunt as Kate, whose loving marriage to Martin's Thomas has yielded some 12 kids.
What's going on?
Guess what? Diane Phillips called. My book's getting published.
Did I tell you we're going to have it all?
You've never said that.
I'm telling you now, baby.
Woo!
Thomas gets a Division I coaching job, and the family moves from an idyllic town in downstate Illinois to Chicago. Alan Ruck, he'll always be Cameron in Ferris Bueller's Day Off to me, and Paula Marshall play their new neighbors.
Is Jake your only child?
No. We have 12.
I couldn't keep her off me.
Now, I have to say, Steve Martin plays the most gentle and probably least credible major college football coach ever, but he's always believable as a quick-witted, frazzled, and yet sympathetic family man. Bonnie Hunt, she's a comic treasure. And the kids are adorable, though I probably wouldn't think so if I had to sit next to them on a cross-country flight.
Is that blood?
No, it's just like... Oh. Clean up on aisle 12. Anybody?
You need help cleaning up?
Cheaper by the Dozen aims a lot of its gags at the adolescent crowd. We get escaped frogs causing chaos and chandeliers crashing and dogs knocking people over. But it also has some sharp one-liners and a strong family heart, so thumbs up.
When I was a kid, I was an only child, and for some reason I read the novel Cheaper by the Dozen about 100 times because I wanted to have 11 brothers and sisters, I think.
Yeah.
The original father, his name was Gilbreth, was a time and motion expert, and he tried to run his family the way he would run a factory. Everybody had a job and a timetable and a schedule and a checklist and everything like that, and I think that also would have been a funny way to approach the story because I can see Steve Martin as that character instead of this character who has no idea about time, motion, or anything else.
No, he just brings the football team in to help things out, which really doesn't work too well. But this movie also does have Ashton Kutcher kind of poking fun at himself as Piper Peraboo's boyfriend, and that's some pretty funny stuff as well.
Okay, next movie. Robert Altman never repeats himself. His new film, The Company, is like spending a year with a ballet company in good times and bad. Inspired by Nev Campbell, who trained as a classical dancer and produced this film, Altman moved in with the Joffrey Ballet of Chicago and cast Malcolm McDowell in a role inspired by the company's legendary artistic director, Gerald Arpino. Here's a rehearsal before an outdoor concert as McDowell uses the carrot and stick approach, criticism followed by praise.
Lift, thighs, lift up, not so loady. And when you make those exits, you know, you hit the wall. I want you to move out and hit the wall. You're not doing that. You're looking like you've got a load in your pants. But I love you all. You're great, okay? You're great.
That night, the performance goes on despite a rainstorm. Nev Campbell dances with Joffrey star Domingo Rubio. Injury is a constant danger, and in the film's most dramatic moment, Suzanne Prisco plays a dancer whose career ends in an instant.
Sore. She snapped her Achilles. What? She snapped it. Let's see if we can get some guys to help us. It's been bothering her.
Someone call Keith.
During the season, Nev Campbell's character begins a relationship with a young chef played by James Franco. But they are both so obsessed and absorbed by their time-demanding jobs that romance suffers. The company shows these dancers starring in world-class productions and yet going home to threadbare apartments and holding down part-time jobs. It's love of dance that motivates them, and McDowell is brilliant as a leader whose quirky personality is unpredictable but somehow inspiring. Altman's previous film was Gosford Park, an ambitious British whodunit with lavish production values, but for this one, he plunged into the middle of the Joffrey with a digital video camera. He reinvents himself with every film. Thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up for me as well. You know, Neve Campbell, she's just it. I just think she's beautiful and wonderful, and obviously all those years of training as a dancer, we see they're not cutting back and forth. I mean, that's her dancing, and that's wonderful stuff. It's a beautiful tribute to the Joffrey Ballet, and they are athletes, and they are working for a relative pittance, and he gets all of that right. I also think there's a little arrogance to this film because Altman doesn't really even bother to give us a story. He starts up with these little side plots here and there, and then he just lets them go because he's really fascinated by the world of this ballet. And I think this could have been a great movie if there was a story on top of it as well.
You know, that would have been a conventional film in which the foreground was taken up by the romance. I think it's great that the whole romance is just kind of an afterthought.
Everything's an afterthought, though.
These
Every
people,
plot
the
element
chef
is
is worried about his cooking, the dancer is worried about her ballet, and they try to have a relationship, and it just doesn't really
No,
seem
because
to work.
Altman's not interested in seeing any of these plot elements to their conclusions or even to any development. He gives us the one dad who's really, you know, very domineering and wants his kid to be a ballet star, and he's not a star. He gives us the Malcolm McDowell character and his struggles to get financing for things, and we get a little taste of all of that, and it goes nowhere.
I think you're describing the style of the film.
Yeah, I am.
It's a flaw when, in fact, I think it's a choice.
Oh, I think it's a deliberate choice on the director's part. I'm also saying, in a way, though, there's, I think, a little bit of a disregard for the audience because he's just like, you know, I'm going to throw these stories out there, and too bad if I don't finish them for you.
I didn't feel that way at all.
Okay, Helen Mirren and Julie Walters go the full Mindy in Calendar Girls when we come back.
Now in theaters. Brought to you by Orville Redenbacher. Start popping today.
Well, for the last 2 hours, I have been exchanging phone calls with Hollywood.
What, the real one?
No, Celia, the chocolate one.
Helen Mirren spearheads a Get Nude movement among women of a certain age and creates a worldwide sensation in Calendar Girls. This good-natured confection, filled with breezy humor and heartfelt relationships, is based on the very famous story of a group of women in their 50s and 60s who posed for some very tasteful nude shots for a fundraising calendar. Mirren plays Chris Harper, and Julie Walters is her best friend Annie, whose beloved husband has recently died of cancer.
It was inspired by John, and it's for John, and it's because of John. And no matter what you might think of the idea, Mari, you're looking at January.
February.
March.
Chris and Annie do a lot of cajoling and bargaining before they can fill out the roster with the needed 12 models, all to be photographed by the extremely reluctant Lawrence, played by Philip Glenister.
Don't touch the buns.
Calendar Girls alternates between full Monty-type humor and unabashedly sentimental moments, as when Chris and Annie try to get some local press attention for their effort and believe they failed miserably.
To add insult to injury, I took my clothes off and no one was interested.
You after the WR thing?
Yes.
That's spill over. They're in ballroom.
All of this is handled with humor and grace. Now, until very recently, the most unusual sight in movies was an actress over 50 taking off her clothes. Now, with Kathy Bates in About Schmidt, Diane Keaton in Something's Gotta Give, and the Calendar Girls, it's almost a trend. What's most encouraging is that in each case, the nudity is played for laughs, but we're not laughing at the actress. We're laughing at the situation and our own hang-ups about non-supermodel nudity, how silly we are and how wonderful these films are.
Yeah, this film really has a healthy feeling to the idea of nudity, and so often when you see young people in nude scenes in the movies, there's kind of an aggression or hostility to it, like, what are you going to do about this? And these women are amused.
Yeah.
They've lived for a while. They understand their bodies, they understand life, And so there is a kind of a warmness and good-heartedness about it.
This is the kind of film where you go, okay, I know about the Calendar Girls. I know they raised like three-quarters of £1 billion or whatever it was, you know, all this money, and that's all wonderful. But how are they going to turn this into a story? But it doesn't feel stretched, and it doesn't feel forced. There's some really good relationship stuff. The husbands acquit themselves well in this film as well.
And it's also fun when they get to come to America and be on television, which I think they also actually did.
Yes, they did.
Okay, The Return of the King, Julia Roberts, and Tim Burton's new film, all when we come back.
Next week is brought to you by Capital One. What's in your wallet? Next week, a special edition of Ebert and Roeper, the big holiday movies. From Something's Gotta Give to Mona Lisa's Smile to The Last Samurai, and many others. Big movies you may want to see over the holidays and reviews you may have missed. Next week on Ebert and Roeper.
We'll see each other soon. Will we?
Let's go. Pippin and Merry go where no hobbit has gone before in The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. It got 2 thumbs up on last week's show, and it opened on Wednesday. Director Peter Jackson tops himself with sensational special effects in the conclusion of his trilogy.
You miserable little maggot! Stove your head! Stove me, lawyer! You're a lawyer! Damn, we're lost. I don't care. I can't do it, Mr. Frodo. I won't wait around for him to kill us.
Mona Lisa's Smile, which opened on Friday, got 2 thumbs up. Julia Roberts stars as an art teacher at Wellesley in the 50s who thinks her students should consider careers other than matrimony.
What law school are you going to go to? I hadn't really thought about that. I mean, after I graduate, I plan on getting married.
And then?
And then I'll be married.
You can do both.
The movie, which is filled with important supporting roles, avoids most of the cliches of movies about inspiring teachers. Roberts plays a woman who is trying to be reasonable in an unreasonable world.
Now, Julia Roberts is very good in this movie, and it's kind of a symbolic thing as well because she's now playing the teacher, and you've got young actresses like Maggie Gyllenhaal and Julia Stiles playing her students, and I'm going to be curious to see what happens with Julia Roberts' career when she's kind of moving out of the young ingenue parts and now is playing a mentor.
It's a very good movie and totally different from Lord of the Rings, and here's a question I have. Do you think if you haven't seen the first 2 parts of Lord of the Rings, you can make any sense out of the 3rd part?
Yes, I do. Weirdly enough, because as I've mentioned earlier, you know, I'm not the world's biggest fan of these stories, and that probably weighed into my review of the first of these 3 films. But I think that if you join this film just as a separate entity, you'd figure out kind of what they're trying to do within the first 10 or 15 minutes, and then you just go with the adventure.
Even if there were things that you don't quite understand, the spectacle and the energy and the physical beauty of the film are such that you just kind of give it a pass and wait to catch on later.
I think more so than the Matrix movies, each one of these actually does stand alone.
Okay, our next movie is named Big Fish, and it has a fish story, all right, along with a lot of other tall tales. It's the new film from Tim Burton, who once again creates a fanciful visual experience, even if the story seems to meander. Albert Finney stars as Edward Bloom, a blowhard who has bored his family for years with long recitations of highly dubious fables about his younger days. Now he's dying, and his son, played by Billy Crudup, would like to learn the real truth at last.
Dad, I have no idea who you are, because you've never told me a single fact.
I told 1,000 facts. Well, it's what I do. I tell stories.
You tell lies, Dad. You tell amusing lies.
In flashbacks, Ewan McGregor plays the father as a young man, remembering the magical moment he met the woman he knew would be his wife.
They say when you meet the love of your life, time stops. And that's true.
And that's Alison Lohman. His stories are filled with unbelievable characters, including Danny DeVito as a dynamic circus owner, Steve Buscemi as a dedicated but hardly productive poet, and Helena Bonham Carter as a mysterious recluse.
I'm sorry. Have I offended you?
No. You did exactly what you promised. Came back. I was just expecting you sooner.
Watching Big Fish, I felt more affection than admiration. The tall tales spin out into Fellini-esque fantasies, and it's intriguing to see connections between characters like the old man's wife, who in youth is played by Alison Lohman, and in the present by Jessica Lange.
I was drying out.
I see.
I think we ought to get you a flat mister, so we can just spray you like a fly.
Like all of Tim Burton's movies, Big Fish is fabulous to look at. But eventually, the story seems to be spinning its heels, kicking up dust, but not getting anywhere. In a way, the movie may be autobiographical. Like his hero, Tim Burton tells great stories and embellishes them with fantastical details, but sometimes the audience wonders when he's going to get to the point. Thumbs down, but affectionately.
You know, I'm going to give it thumbs up, although I understand what you're saying. I think it could have been tightened a little bit more, but I think it's just such a visual flight of fancy. First of all, it's just an amazing-looking film. We know Tim Burton can do that. And then you've got all of these wonderful actors turning in unique performances. Albert Finney, you know, and he is a blowhard. You're right. He's the kind of guy like you're rolling your head. Billy Crudup playing his son is rolling his eyes and shaking his head going, geez, I got to hear this story again. But it's such a strong performance. Jessica Lange, who has this undying devotion to him. Danny DeVito, all these little cameos. Steve Buscemi is so funny, and I agree with what you're saying on one level. I get, you know, there's all these ingredients, and it never becomes this final dish that we can really dig into and understand what it's all about. But so much of that is so interesting that I am going to give it thumbs up.
It does finally come together, but in a way that still had me kind of scratching my head, because now that I understood the truth behind the stories, I wasn't sure that I was even now convinced.
It's okay if you're not convinced. I think that's all right. I think there's a kind of ambiguity there where you're like, well, I don't know how many of these stories are still even true, although I think it's kind of nice how they tie things up, and I don't want to give too much away there, but I think they do kind of answer the question.
Okay, coming up next, some startling revelations by Robert McNamara, who engineered the Vietnam War. That's next.
The answer.
In a year filled with fascinating documentaries such as Tupac Resurrection, Winged Migration, and Capturing the Freedmans, the best and most important of all is Fog of War. The great Errol Morris of Thin Blue Line and Gates of Heaven fame interviews former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara via the Ateratron, a unique device that enables the subject to look straight into the camera and at his inquisitor at the same time. McNamara, 85 at the time of these interviews, is brutally candid.
You lost your wingman. It hurts me as much as it does you. I sent him there. And I've been there. I know what it is. But you lost one wingman, and we destroyed Tokyo.
McNamara has long been regarded as the ultimate hawk, but in excerpts of taped conversations with Lyndon B. Johnson, it's McNamara who comes across as a moderate voice of caution.
I think pushing out 300,000, 400,000 Americans out there without being able to guarantee what it will lead to is a terrible risk and a terrible problem.
As a commander under General Curtis LeMay in World War II, McNamara describes himself as part of the mechanism that firebombed nearly 70 Japanese cities and wiped out hundreds of thousands of civilians before the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. McNamara says LeMay told him they would have been tried as war criminals if the U.S. had lost the war. McNamara does not disagree with that assessment. Thumbs way up for this film.
This is a great documentary, and you know, I wonder why McNamara had the wisdom to choose Errol Morris to make it, because a lot of people would stay way away from Errol Morris with his strange and wonderful and poetic approach.
Right.
And this is one of the greatest portraits of a person that I've seen in a documentary, because McNamara really comes across as a thoughtful man who has given a lot of consideration to what happened during Vietnam and before and after, and shares it very frankly, and this movie is just riveting.
He wants the challenge, and he does want to face up to the realities of his life, and he's very candid about saying, look, some of the things we did were immoral, they were unethical, they were over the top, they didn't need to be done in the so-called good war of World War II.
Also not very wise, and you know, I hope that somebody in the White House looks at this film now, because the parallels are inescapable.
I couldn't agree with you more. And, you know, after Bowling for Columbine, I think this would be a great follow-up film to win the Oscar for Best Documentary.
Yes, it would. We'll be back in a moment to recap this week's show.
Visit our website at ebertandroper.tv or at movies.com. Join Ebert and Roeper's 4th Annual Film Festival at Sea. Preview the hottest new movies and enjoy lively discussions with the critics. Roger and Richard sail to the Bahamas at Disney's Castaway Cay on March 11th through the 14th aboard the Disney Wonder. Ebert and Roeper's Film Festival at Sea. Call your travel agent or 1-800-945-3806.
Okay, recapping this week's movies, 2 thumbs up for Cheaper by the Dozen. It opens Christmas Day. 2 thumbs up for The Company. It also opens Christmas Day. 2 thumbs up for Calendar Girls. We split on Big Fish. but 2 very enthusiastic thumbs up for The Fog of War. And getting 2 thumbs up on previous shows were The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, and Mona Lisa Smile. They both open this week.
Remember, you can hear all our recent reviews at ebertandroper.tv or at movies.com, and read us in print at suntimes.com. Until next week, the balcony is closed.
With all of the big titles in theaters right now, I hope people find time to see The Fog of War, because that is not just like a task, you know, like it's going to be educational or good for you. It is a fascinating film.
Even if you think you know everything there is to know about Vietnam War, you should see this. It's a valuable history lesson.